are
YouTube
live.
notifications jump up and go, oh shit, wait, what?
I like how Joel says we are live and Ben immediately says, oh shit. Unrelated, but funny.
Should be getting some beats and tunes on the stream right now. In addition to our verbal voices.
Beats and tunes and beats and tunes and beats and tunes.
Did anybody catch the Black Hills emergency webcast on ransomware today?
I did not. My understanding is that the ransom people said, well, we didn't do it on purpose.
Well, I think what they said was they were going to try to do a better job of vetting out their customers.
Yeah, no, I did see that. That was awesome. They're like, yeah, they're not supposed to, our customers are not supposed to be doing this.
Yeah. We're going to try to work with a better class of criminals from here on out. No, but actually the funny part was John Strand apparently fired up his computer about half an hour or so before it started, and then wait till Windows updates hit. So then he fired up his backup computer and Windows updates also hit. So then he was just trying to race to get through updates before it started.
Well, my tertiary backup today is my iPad.
Excellent.
And what a horror.
Well, I have my work laptop here. I have my desktop here. I have my phone. probably connect to something.
Yeah, I think if I couldn't get my laptop or my desktop to work, I'd probably have to grab like a tablet.
errors.
That puts us up like a dozen people and everybody in Zoom.
My God, is that Aaron?
Yeah, they're with the neighborhood.
Check.
Check.
We hear you.
Aaron Scanlon. Excellent. What does your hat say? It looks like it says ESGN.
That is correct.
And what does that mean?
It depends at what point you ask that. Up to a certain point, it stood for East Side Gary, a word that I can't say, referring to a gang in Gary, Indiana. And now it refers to the title of an album called Evil Seeds Grow Naturally.
Interesting. I think you get to pick since it's your hat.
I mean, I'm a bigger fan of when it referred to the gang, but it's also a good album. So, you know.
Depends on the company.
Exactly.
There you go.
100%.
There you go.
Is my audio working?
Sure.
Yes, it is. Few orders.
Test.
Testing. It's the wave of the future.
Prepare test.
What do I do?
They're trolling the pipeline. So proud of our systems.
Here at Conventional Pilot Pipelines, our systems are so critical, we cannot take them down to
Actions for wussies.
Yeah, I recognize that face. How you doing?
Hey, good. How are you?
Great.
Can you hear me okay? I'm using a new headset. Cool. Awesome.
Just keep your arms and legs inside the car at all times. Keep your patching to yourself.
Your reboot as well.
Definitely. In fact, if you could just never say the word reboot ever again, that would be
Oh, so you mean unannounced reboot? Is that your preferred method?
I am not going to argue with unannounced reboots. I tell you what, we have found systems faster that way than any other way.
It's called ringing the telephone.
Anybody know whose system this is? No? Should we reboot it and see if anybody got?
Works well for random accounts you find as well. You disable them, suddenly everyone who cares is notifying you that their account is disabled.
Sorry, we had a gap in our inventory. We needed another owner.
So they shut something down, waited like, I think their process was to wait 4 weeks or 6 weeks or something like that. Nobody screened. So they decommed it, shredded it, whatever. And then like a couple of weeks after all of that, it turned out that it was the license server for something that only ran once a quarter.
Whoopsie!
Yeah, exactly. Like, well,
It's like
sorry?
we live in a room and there's
Once
a
a quarter
poster on the
reminds me
wall.
of some patching cycles I know.
We stare at it and we think
Looking at you, Java.
that's the whole world.
Once a quarter century.
The room and the poster.
Once a quarter, if you
But
can get the
it's
green zone.
all a lie. Something to distract us from the truth.
So you've been working on this once a
They're
quarter
lying
patch
to
cycle
us.
for nigh on 6 years now.
We're lying
I assume
to
that requires
ourselves.
a reboot and a green zone for the reboot. Yes.
The
So the
room
patching is at
not
once a
the
quarter.
world.
Yes. How often is the green zone?
The
We have
world
yet to determine.
is much bigger and much stranger.
Welcome to Walmart. We love you. That's your shit.
Stranger.
The woman with the holy sweatpants is very offended.
Stranger.
Those are her going out sweatpants. I have a going out hoodie right now as well.
She's like, those tears are intentional.
They're for fashion.
Authentic.
Stranger.
What, your balls don't get hot?
Lying to
You were wearing nice
Stranger.
pants. Cozy as hell. Look them up. Yep.
Easy breezy.
We're all transfixed.
Thai fisherman.
Thai, like Thailand, or like Thai,
Yeah,
like
yeah, like
how you close them. Oh, okay, cool. Interesting. Have to do that.
It's fancy talk for MC gamer fans, really, if we're being honest.
10-minute warning.
Copy that.
in that room. We all feel safe in that room. In that room. We all feel safe in that room. It's just that I get my hopes
I
out
found those pants. What did we used to call those in the raves in the 90s?
so many times. It's led to nothing.
You guys remember that terrible
I found nothing.
band show?
Yes.
Ziggy zaggy, ziggy zaggy, oi, oi, oi.
There you go.
I'm feeling shades of Junko here.
Tastes like root beer and pink.
They're like Jinko
And
jeans.
chalk.
Right.
I think the more it tastes bad, the more effective it is. So probably super effective.
It's probably, yeah. It does a good job with my poor little sensitive stomach. I get all nervous talking in front of you fancy cats. Whatever. I got these because Katrina wanted to stream, and I borrowed them. They're nice. I'm not gonna lie.
Let's see, they have a decent mic. You look at it. Is that really a good mic? Something beautiful.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm not. Oh, hey, they can hear us in the YouTube
I think it's
Okay.
intended.
Thank you, Aaron. It's a feature, not a bug. Shouts out to my homie Aaron, texting me about that, making sure a boy's not caught with his pants down or his Pepto-Bismol cap off.
I just looked at you and
Definitely ought to give them share perms. Okay, there we go. And while we're on the subject, I need them too.
do you want me to go ahead and start sharing the YouTube?
And there's no objection.
Change control ticket and
Okay, so we're about 6 minutes out.
Is this just in time provisioning? Is that what I'm receiving?
Yeah.
Perfect. Great. Do I need feedback for that or?
Is Justin always getting brought in with shit?
really we just appreciate if you could get your driver's license.
always
to read
I-
the smart card yet?
I haven't left the house in a year. It might take me a minute to find both of them.
I'm receiving of the
Might have
facts.
to go after.
Did it ever occur to you that they might have used the rug to carry the body out?
I had to find my work badge for something unrelated to work. Like I just needed like another ID. Like, what? I don't know. I haven't been inside that place for a while. I don't know where that ID is actually. So let me spend half my day on conference calls finding it real quick.
excellent offset. Where's your badge?
It doesn't work right now anyway. It's fine. It's safe.
Right, if I haven't badged in over a year, is it disabled by now?
I think I can still use mine to park.
Are you paying for parking still?
I don't want to lose my spot.
Oh, I decided.
Covered parking.
I canceled it like the second weekend, and I was like saving money. Ugh, student loans, man.
You ain't got to be paying those right now either. Come on.
I wish to know who was
Only
responsible
some
for
of
last
them.
night's outrage.
Then I see the shadow
Like-
of my
like
hand.
You perkins.
And there's no objection.
Yeah. Ones that don't have interest rates, it's fine right now. Not necessary to worry about.
Come on, Papa Biden, hook me up with that 50K.
Yeah. Where's my release?
Or at least just don't fuck over the Obama anarchy plans. I got 5 more years on that public service contract. I mean, come on, we all know that's gonna go away before I get to cash in on it.
They just won't. They
So
just
it's
won't
like
honor it. So
Social
it's fine.
Security. Yeah.
Yup.
We're gonna bring back Betsy DeVos just in time to give you the middle finger. You know.
At least I gave you something.
Should probably come out the grave just to flip me off.
Hey, court order you say. Yes, Judge, we have every intention of honoring you.
Oh, speaking of Judge, y'all see that video of that guy that accidentally joined the Zoom with the name Buttfucker 3000? No. Oh, it's good. It's good. Hold up, let me take that.
Are you using the guy's car? The guy driving in the Zoom call? My husband showed me that one. That was pretty good.
Oh, that Ohio guy.
Yeah.
It was like very intense.
distracted driving.
Yeah. And he was like a co-founder, like introduced it or something ridiculous.
Right. Yeah, I saw that. That was one of my favorites.
You know, while I do think that video is funny, I also have to wonder, who are the poor bastards that are sitting there just going through every single court video that this court pushes out to find the gems, you know?
Have you seen some of the other ones? Like the domestic abuser?
I don't know if I've seen that one.
So he was in, like, they were allowing a domestic violence case to be brought in that same court. I recognized the judge, that's why I immediately thought of it. They had them testifying, like the boyfriend and the girlfriend or whatever, and it was him intimidating her. He turned off his Zoom camera and starts intimidating her in the same room as the victim. And so the police, like the prosecutor knew what was happening, and the police like roll up and are like, he's like, can you step outside and show me the numbers on your house that you say that you're at that location? And he's like,
Hell yeah.
no. Yeah, it was super interesting to even like realize that the prosecutor had caught on so early on. It was pretty cool.
That's nice to hear.
Yeah, I think it was the first like notable offense of like victim intimidation or witness intimidation on a Zoom call, like in a legal setting for the United States.
We live in a society.
Okay, we got about a minute and a half left. Let's go ahead and get that again.
We live in a society, do we?
We do.
It's society by any other name.
Maybe a society, but a civilization.
Can you guys see okay?
All good.
Okay, cool. I can't unmute once I'm in full screen, so.
Okay.
excited to see some familiar faces. So my name is Danielle. I am on Discord as Always Never MFA, and I'm here to kick things off tonight. So we'll just start with some SecKC 101. If you've never been here and you just kind of dipping your toes in for the first time, we're just going to go over some kind of ground rules so everyone has a good time. So things that you should know about SecKC: we are awesome. This is the biggest and largest monthly InfoSec event in the world. On here, it says that we do meet at Kansas Hall. That is, I think, up in the air still. So if you know of a cool location that can fit us or that you think we should check out, let the SecKC DevOps people know. It would be a great opportunity for us to meet in person again once everything's back to normal. Another thing that is probably just as important as the wonderful people that are here and the group is that these meetings are unrated. You have been warned. Sometimes we have kids or maybe your family members in the background. Just make sure that you understand that sometimes there is violence, there is cursing, there is maybe sexual content or dialogue that isn't appropriate for all ages. Another important thing to know about SecKC is that we do have a code of conduct that we like to respect in person. We look for the yellow badge for advocates of that code of conduct. You can check us out on Discord. On the upper right-hand side of your Discord page, you'll see a couple of members that can help you out. Generally, it's pretty easygoing, so I would not be too worried about having to seek this out. But in case you do, reach out to me and I can help, or any of those in the code of conduct. Another very important thing: destroy no data, maintain no persistence, and above all, do no harm. We're here to have fun and to kind of relax from maybe some of our more stressful jobs. So we are here more in a theoretical destruction than actual destruction. Oh, a very important thing to note: state and federal law enforcement officers are encouraged and do attend SecKC meetings. That does mean that there are cops probably here today. If you're doing something illegal, please keep it to yourself. We don't have any member lists or anything like that. We use Eventbrite to figure out how many pizzas to order. But other than that, it's not really something that we would want to be representing ourselves poorly in front of law enforcement. One of the things that I really admire about SecKC is that all humans are technical and everyone is welcomed, encouraged to share what they know or what their experience is like. I've been to SecKC a number of times. This is my first time volunteering, but everyone belongs here, and the more people that belong and contribute to SecKC, the better of an organization will be. So you are encouraged to come check it out and find your home. In person, when we are physically meeting, we do have an STFU wall. If you are trying to listen to the presenter, sometimes it's a bit easier to talk amongst yourself and maybe a coworker or someone else that you're meeting there with behind that wall. Here, we do have another channel if you want to maybe talk about other things. Otherwise, there's a number of different channels you can hop on in Discord. Yeah, let the talk stay on agenda, basically. Another challenge we'll give you this month is to meet someone new. If you disagree with someone, maybe step aside and figure out why you disagree with them on that idea. You don't disagree with that person, perhaps. It's more of a meeting of the minds. So take that opportunity to find some common ground and maybe share an experience that is more positive. Another important thing: volunteers are highly recommended at SecKC, seckc.org/connect. Go ahead and check out what volunteer opportunities we are looking for. And like I said, we use the Eventbrite to get pizza. We also use it to get you maybe virtual meeting information until we meet in person again. There's also YouTube. Here are our handles. You can find us on Twitter at SecKC, #SecKC on pretty much any related posts. And don't forget about the swag. There's some really awesome stuff in there: coffee cups, all sorts of cool branded stuff. So check out the SecKC shop. And this is our agenda for tonight. So we are at SecKC 101 at 7 o'clock. At about 7:15, we are going to start the news with Aaron. 7:30, we are going to talk about log management at home on the cheap. we know most of you probably aren't doing it, at least properly. And AsmodianX is going to show us a better way to do it at home. And at 8:15, we are going to start something that we've not really had an opportunity to do before, at least since I've been coming to SecKC, so maybe it's an old school thing. Security Symposium is going to talk about the University of Minnesota. They were banned from contributing some malicious commits to the Linux kernel for research purposes. And we are going to have kind of an introduction, an overview of that topic. And then we're going to ask that the audience participate. If you're on YouTube, it will be hard for you to participate. So if you want to hop over to the Zoom channel, we will be able to get your questions answered and hopefully give you the opportunity to maybe lead more discussion. So we got a couple of minutes. It looks like we will be starting in just about 10 minutes or so. See you all soon.
Yeah, that challenge ideas, not people thing. It's going to be pretty important tonight. I'm about to make y'all real pissed off.
No, you're not going to make us pissed off. You're just going to be wrong. It's okay.
Well,
You might
yeah,
be surprised
that's the
how
goal.
many are
That's
on
the
your
goal,
side.
right?
You might be surprised how many's on your side here.
I'm hoping to be surprised by that.
For the folks on YouTube, if you're looking to find the Zoom link because you want to participate, and we hope that you do, I just dropped it in the general channel on Discord.
Good call.
Yep. Big props to Always Never MFA as well. I'm sorry, you mentioned your name and I will never remember. I always remember people's handles. It was really awkward meeting up with Rickson the other week and having a real life friend with me. And I was like, yeah, this is Rickson. So yeah, I'll never remember people's real names.
Apologize
Anyway,
for Aaron, Danielle. You did a great job.
there we go. Yeah, that's exactly where I was going with that. To my knowledge, she hasn't done 101 before. You did a fan-freaking-tastic job for 101. Amazing. We need more volunteers just like you.
I live in a meeting marathon at work, so it kind of just felt like work, honestly. Let me present this slide deck to you. No, this is the fun part, though. News is kind of my favorite part. This is why I really came to SecKC in the first place.
Oh, the pressure's on. I'm so glad I had my Pepto-Bismol.
Yeah, it's all on you now.
What's that other bottle you're drinking? It doesn't look like Pepto.
This is not Pepto-Bismol. This is Smooth Fuzz. This is a peach sour from Boulevard that a homie of mine gave me. I'm a little Nancy Pants, and I don't like actual beer. But I really do like sours and lambics. So, no, Joel, I do not have shot slides this time. I'm sorry.
Some sours make me feel like a mamby-pamby because they're too sour.
It's something about, it's like how someone's taste buds work, right? Because like my wife always says, this tastes like fucking vinegar. And I don't taste that, like, or maybe I'm just a lot weirder than I thought. I don't know.
No, I think you're exactly right. Everybody has different taste buds. Your taste buds are different from your own taste buds from 7 years ago. So,
This is, I don't know. I'm really hoping at some point I learn to like avocado, because I've never liked avocado or cheese or any really most Mexican foodstuffs on toast. No, that's the thing. I want to know if the whole avocado on toast thing is worth it. But I can't.
Avocado smoothies are where it's at. They're so good.
That sounds gross to me. That's because my taste buds ain't on track. They need to grow up.
Yeah, no, I like avocado, and avocado smoothies does not sound good to me either. But I will tell you, if you like your sours and lambics, check out Crane Brewing in Raytown. They do a selection of them, and all the ones I've had so far have been tasty.
Ooh, good to know.
I've had a couple things from Crane Brewing, and they've both been good. One of them was a blonde ale. Can't remember what the other one was, but yeah, they were both good.
They do like a tea vice, which is like with hibiscus tea, and it's totally not what you expect. It's actually really good.
Nice. I don't think avocado toast qualifies as Mexican food. No. Okay, let's see. I should share a screen. Share that. Yep. Cool. Locked and loaded. Ready to go. I forget
It's
who
been a
made
busy
that.
week too.
Man, that's the thing. It hasn't been a busy month apparently. So there was a lot of chatter in general this morning about because I was having trouble filling out, 40 links for once. That hasn't happened in a long time, by the way, might I add. I thought that maybe I was just getting lazy. But no. People brought up a bunch of stories. And I was like, yep, got it. Yep, got it. Yep, got it.
Well, we spent the last 2 months completely on fire, so
Maybe that's what it is. Just even the news, the media outlets have alert fatigue. Yeah, March was chaos. And they have avocados in the Philippines, I just learned.
Someone wanted to know if you had shot slides. It sounds like it may be a hot fuzz
No, I
and
told
or Pepto.
Joel, I'm sorry. I ain't got them this time. The shot slides only come in. Really, I don't have an excuse because they were coming in on the double month decks in order to fill up time. And in theory, I should have done the same thing to fill up time here. I just started putting in a whole bunch of bullshit toward the end. Well, there you go. So just about the last 5 slides or so, know that I was really stretching, and you can just start shooting them down right about then. That'd be perfect. It'll also make me more enjoyable. So maybe shoot those down like here in the next 3 minutes real quick. It'll make me sound a lot smarter.
Perfect.
Please hold your watches up to the screen. I ain't got no watch. If you are currently watching on YouTube and you would like to participate in the symposium this evening, hop in the Zoom as well. If you don't have the Zoom link, that was posted in the Discord. If you're not in the Discord, then what the fuck is wrong with you? I mean, join the Discord, and then you'll be able to participate. So do that. Does anyone ever keep an eye on the Slack anymore?
I will
Does it
go look
Slack?
at it like every time I open Slack for some reason. That's just not every day.
Is it used at all anymore?
That was my curiosity.
Yeah.
There are a few holdouts that like
every once in a while I'll catch myself really necro posting.
Yeah, SecKC was the last group I was in that was using Slack on a consistent basis. So once this Discord came out, I said, nope, done. One less fucking thing to be running 24/7 on my open computers.
I go there to look at the deleted messages sometimes. Not frequently.
Quiet but not deserted is what I'm hearing back. So that's good. At least there's no shenanigans that need quelling over there.
not last I looked.
Not that we've really ever had it. Well, I take that back. I heard about some shenanigans before my time, but didn't really have any major events on Slack while I was around. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for Discord. Okay. Now, 7:15. Time to stretch. And, all right. Yep. Muscles relaxed. So, here we go. Open source intel brief. Good evening, everyone. For those of you that have not been to one of these meetings before, or perhaps it's been so long that you don't know this bit. This is a little bit we call the news. And this is where we talk a little bit about a whole lot of things that went on between our last meeting and this meeting. But we do it in a very exciting format. So I have about 15 seconds to tell you about the thing. This will take
10 minutes total because of that strict time limit, and I don't use my filter. So Danielle mentioned that we are unrated. I say fuck a whole lot, especially whenever I trip up on my words. So we should have someone have a fuck counter around, like a little clicky, like see how many times I say that. Anyway, ideas for next time. So that's how this is going to go. Now, of course, you're not actually going to learn anything throughout the course of this. I don't want to get your hopes up or anything like that. So how do you learn more about the shit that we actually talk about here? I do post the set of links in the news links channel of the Discord. So yet again, another reason for all y'all slacking on that, get it right, to join over to the Discord. Look for the text file that I'll upload, and then I also have lately started uploading the slides as well. Bill requested them, don't know why, because all they are is a series of shittily put together memes in a PowerPoint. Actually, it's a keynote that I convert into PowerPoint, but we're splitting hairs here, right? So without any further ado, well, maybe a little more ado. All right, let's get cracking. First and foremost, unfortunately, a good soul left, Dan Kaminsky, passed away due to diabetic ketoacidosis. I got no more shit to say about that. I suggest we all take a moment of silence. Okay, there we go. So we had some empty shelves at branches of Netherlands' largest supermarket chain recently after some ransomware hit one of their logistics suppliers. People weren't able to get cheese. They were fucking freaking out. It was terrible, but really that ought to make you think about what's going on with ransomware. Name wreck is a thing. This is affecting a whole bunch of IoT devices. They affect the, FreeBSD and then IPNet, NucleusNet, and NetX. If just 1% of devices are vulnerable, that would be about 100 million devices around the globe. The U.S. Department of Justice gave the FBI some permission to remove some web shells from Exchange servers that were compromised. This sounds really cool in theory, but by the same token, this is also a slippery slope, and it'll be really interesting to see what sort of precedent this sets. The Department of Homeland Security, FBI, and the NSA are all fucking pleading you to please patch your shit for the love of fucking Christ. Here's the things that they are that Russia is using against you right now. If you haven't patched this shit, fuck you, get it off the network. We've got an interesting article about malicious bots that might be hoarding COVID-19 vaccine signups. So, think about it. They're taking your fucking PS5s and your Xbox One X's. They're coming for your fucking vaccines next. It'll be really interesting to see how that pans out. Hopefully it's okay. CodeCov had their bash uploader script compromised. Looks like that started in January 31st of this year, ended in April 30th. So if you use that product, sucks to be you. I don't envy your work for the next few months, but you should go ahead and take care of that shit. We've got an awesome story here about how Ingenuity needed to fly, but didn't have that capability when it landed, so they pushed out an update over space. Kind of makes you wonder what takes so fucking long for AT&T and Verizon to send your cell phone patches, doesn't it? Doesn't it? We had another BGP leak happen. This time, Vodafone India announced a route that usually belongs to Route Maria da BR, whatever the fuck that is. Long story short, this impacted about 30,000 plus advertised routes, mostly affecting Indian users, but still felt around the world. Tag Barnacle is a group that is compromising Revive servers, which is like an open source app for orgs that don't want to pay for like an ad service. They compromise these servers and then send up ads to people with iPhones, all that fun shit. University of Minnesota got in trouble for submitting patches that were bogus. We're going to talk a lot more about that later on tonight, so just know that that's going to be a real fun thing to talk about. Let's see. We had an awesome story from Signal that it was Moxie just so happened to stumble across a Celebrite container and figure out that it's a piece of shit. So that's really fun to read. Definitely take a look at that. We've got, let's see, an IoT law going through over in the UK that would, among other things, make it so that manufacturers can't use guessable passwords like password or admin in default settings. Be kind of cool if that pans out and actually proves to be useful, but time will tell. intel on that. We've got NIST and NICE coming together to create the U.S. Cyber Games. It's supposed to be some kind of fucking Olympics for hacking, I guess. You have to be 18 to 26 years old, though, so they're a bunch of agists. Fuck them. But if you know any college people, go for it. If you happen to use password state, sucks to be you, at least potentially. So there was a slim window in which their uploader got compromised. If you happen to update your software during that time frame, you're a little hosed on that. Definitely, take a look at that. Here's a fun one. Beavers in Canada hacked their internet by chewing through a fiber conduit. They actually chewed through a 4.5-inch conduit that was buried 3 feet underground. So Canada needs to figure out how to beaver-proof their internet. We've got a big collection of them. They call this Comb 21 compilation of many breaches. So this isn't a new breach in and of itself, but it is a collection of exposed breaches. So again, it's kind of interesting to see what people can do with that data. We've got a really cool blog post here about why cryptocurrency is bullshit. Let me read some of this to you. Let's see. What about the few failed economies whose people are desperately using cryptocurrency to keep the wheel of their fate spinning? Those make for a good headline. But what about the rural communities whose tax dollars are subsidized? Fuck. The bankrupt power plant that is existing over in the Finger Lakes area of New York, speaking of, is now being used to dump out 641,000 tons of CO2 equivalent gases per year to exclusively mine cryptocurrency, because that matters, right? Let's see. We've got a really cool blog post here from a pen tester who's giving some info on things that he wished he would have done in the past. Don't be afraid to talk to clients. Write the report while you pen test. Provide reproducible POCs for your attacks, and so on and so forth. Read about that if you're interested in getting into pen testing. We've got something. Oh no, come on, play, you asshole. There's a GIF here. Play. Okay, there we go. Let's see. Patrick Wardell found some crazy shit on Mac OS. What else is new, right? You can read about it. Jamf mentioned that they've got evidence that this was exploited in the wild a little bit, so that's interesting as well. Let's see. We had a crypto exchange that, oh shit, what? Oh yeah, okay. This is a company who decided to apply for a job as a ransomware operator. They provide chat logs and some interesting shit that you can look at there. Dell Support Assist is still a piece of shit. Surprised nobody. In particular, this time, the dbutil 23.sys driver has a number of vulnerabilities in it. If you have Support Assist installed, uninstall it and then reinstall a new one, because sure, nothing bad will happen again, right? Ransomware operators have recently compromised the Colonial Pipeline that has caused a state of emergency to be declared in 17 states. Essentially, the state of emergency is just to get more funds to deliver fuel to random places. Oh, but it's okay, guys, because they're not gonna do it again. No honor among thieves, but they do mention here, hey, our bad, we didn't realize that shit was going on. We won't do it again. So that'll last for all of a week before they stop giving a fuck. Qualys found 21 issues with XSIM, the mail server, 10 remotely exploitable, 11 locally. They gave it the name 21 Nails as a result. If you run an XSIM server that is at or before 4.94.2, you should fucking update. This was an article that was brought to my attention because I was running out of news articles to talk about, and apparently people give a fuck about Zucker having a goat named Bitcoin. Why? Don't know. Don't fucking care either. This is why people don't care about tech news. We've got another article here talking about how someone managed to control 27% of the entire Tor network exit points in February. This is bad because then, of course, people can know what you're doing on Tor and de-anonymize you. I couldn't say that word right. Blah, 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 blah. We had an aggressive, financially motivated threat group take advantage of some issues in the Sonic Wall VPN to deploy a new ransomware called Five Hands, which is apparently a derivative of Hello Kitty, which is all a derivative of Death Note, I guess. Whatever. We've got more Pulse Secure vulnerabilities. This one in particular, CVE 2021-22893, has a 10 out of 10 score on CVS 3. Definitely upgrade that shit. Let's see. F5, yet another vulnerability. This happens every fucking month, doesn't it? This one is because of the KDC being overlapped. So apparently here, they don't give you instructions for configuring Active Directory with the KDC when you actually need to. We've got a very interesting blog post here talking about how the Kremlin harbors ransomware actors and how the Kremlin is so conducive to ransomware operations. And that's really pretty interesting. Long story short, if you don't fuck with Mother Russia won't fuck with you. We've got a case of a student who tried to successfully, I guess, pirated some software because they didn't want to spend hundreds of dollars on a license that wound up actually infecting some biomolecular institute and has compromised all of their data. SolarWinds has been reamed so much through the media in recent weeks that they have literally changed their name to Enable, whatever the fuck that means, right? It's going to make people think of Tenable. iOS's new privacy features are in. Ars Technica ran a story saying a whopping 4% of users are opting into tracking. Don't know what's wrong with those 4% of people, but people aren't very happy about it. Here's another fun one. A guy named Pontus Johnson, awesome last name, found a vulnerability in the universal Turing machine. It's kind of interesting because if this is the smallest, Signal gave a very devastating blog post about Facebook. They showed all these kind of ads to show people how they were targeted by Facebook, and Facebook was very unhappy about that. So Signal's got 2 good punches in this week. Ooh, real good. Adobe tried to slip past me, but luckily Frogman's got my back. There's a whole bunch of vulnerabilities released for Adobe products over just today. Number of those being critical. Make sure you patch those. We've got something that's super serious, and you know that it's serious because it has a logo and it has a website. There's essentially some issues with wireless products that we're going to rehash again and again. For like the umpteenth billionth time. And I ran out of things to do, but I'm back in Kansas City. So if you ever want to hang out, if you want to catch some coffee, if you want to talk about the bad life choices I've made in life, hit me up. I'm down to hang. It'll be a great time. And that, my friends, is the news.
Still makes me happy.
Need to get like a
look
sound
forward
effect
to it every
board
month.
where I get like beer, 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 beer. That's got to be a real thing.
Yeah.
Someone suggested making dinging noises every time you drop the F-bomb so we could have a count. Did we get an official count? I think I see 24.
There's mixtures. I hear 21.
Right, Reed
I hear
says
25. I see 24.
I had 10 and I got distracted, I guess, listening to the article.
I know it was more than
They were
10.
in the 20s already. So it's like, I'm probably off.
There are some interesting stories in there, though. I would highly recommend. In fact, I'm actually going to take the time to save this text file right now and post it right now.
The Turing machine one just kills me because that's like the simplest like root computer of all time.
Yes, that is the one that I really wish I had more than 15 seconds to talk about, because the implications of that are very interesting, right? And that's exactly what I was about to get into before the slide change, was that if a Turing machine is the smallest, unit of computing, and if that is vulnerable, not necessarily intentionally, but vulnerable by design, how, we always talk about how much easier it is to, implement security from the beginning and not the end. Well, is it that fucking easy?
I better get.
It's been pointed out that puts us at 26.
You can't count outside of the news. That's not fair.
All righty. Well, so hi. I'm going to go ahead and go into my presentation here. This is about memory. So human memory starts getting kind of bad around 2 days after an incident. So if you're working on a incident, you need to take good notes. Part of that is when you're looking at the situation, you need to have some centralized, accurate way of searching through and figuring out what has actually happened. And so that gets into log management. My name is Joel Kirshner, and I am AV guy for SecKC amongst other organizations, and security analyst and a little bit of everything geek. So I want to go over kind of why do we want to do this? Why do we want to take the effort? Why do we want to eat up terabytes of disk space for something that isn't really an end user, isn't something that isn't is a business thing? Now, also, before we get into this too much, I want to remind you that log management, there's thousands of security products out there. Each and every one, when they're sold to you, it's sold as the end all be all, will fix all your problems and will tell you all the, all the bad stuff in your environment and will make you lunch. And no, log management is a tool. It is a tool that will allow you to learn your environment, but it will not do it by itself. So you're always going to have somebody that is willing to take the time to make your log management system, your SIM, all of that cool security stuff. There needs to be human hours involved in that in order to make it work. Some of the reasons why you'd want to implement log management would be security. So you can build an accurate timeline, which identifies the onset and scope of a security breach, regulatory compliance, because Uncle Sam said so, network baseline analysis, if you're just trying to get have a tool that you can diagnose network problems with, and situational awareness, where you can drink from the fire hose and from that come up with a nice, beautiful map that tells you what's going on. Where do logs come from? It's like, where do babies come from? Unfortunately, it's not that hard. If it has the word smart, internet enabled, or managed in it, the product description, chances are it generates logs. Though not always in a way that we can use. There's a couple different types of log management that you need to be aware of. There's the traditional log management, which is just throw it all in a pile and we'll figure it out later. And then there's log event management, where you grab everything you can understand and rip and parse out all of the parts of it that are meaningful, and coming up with charts and graphs and all that stuff from that information. We want to, as much as possible, preserve the truth of what is happening. With log event management, it works best if you know ahead of time exactly what you're getting. So if you know the types of logs you're going to get, if you know the format, that works great, because then you can easily extract out the bits and pieces that you want. Cheap log event management solutions may not be very usable, because either it doesn't understand all of the sources or formats that you're sending to it. So it'll look at an incoming log and then say, I don't know what this is, and drop it. And in other cases, you can have incoming logs that work, but then sometimes either there's a revision change, or it gets malformatted, or you have a surge and it gets dropped or corrupted. So that's kind of the ugly truth of log event management. You got to be careful with it. The useful part of log event management, though, is that you can do ad hoc searches, which means you can just sit down and search through mountains of data. And it's a lot easier because it's already pulled out all the interesting fields. So you can look for specific IP addresses, usernames, all that kind of stuff. Regular log management, it's all about you're saving it in its original format. It's difficult to perform ad hoc searches. And you really do have to do a lot of work when you're at search time, when you're digging through it to extract out the things you want to know. So when you're trying to dig through history, you know, hours, days, years of machine information, you're typically digging through terabytes of information, and it's not easy. The methods you use on a day-to-day basis to parse through, you know, 1,000-line spreadsheet don't work when you're dealing with terabytes of information. It's just the methodology, it requires a whole different way of doing things. So the regular expressions that you would use to parse a, you know, 1,000-line message just wouldn't work very well for a 20 million line message. So that's something to take to bear in mind as you're planning ahead. So this is a little bit of a pop quiz, and this kind of relates to some of the things you need to be thinking about when you stand up any new service. What security concept does CIA stand for? Is it Central Intelligence Agency, Criminals in Action, Confidentiality, Integrity, and Accessibility, Cats in Absence? All right, I think we have a vote on C, and that is correct. Confidentiality, integrity, and accessibility. So is the database secure? Chances are, if you're doing log management, you're going to be using a database of some kind. Is it encrypted at rest? Are you using SSL? Is it authenticated in transit? Is the data only accessible by people you want? Integrity. Log shenanigan prevention. Does the log transfer protocol ensure message accuracy? Do you have a trusted management network? If you think about it, think about like some of the old log protocols like syslog. There is nothing there. There is absolutely nothing there that prevents somebody from sending a stream of bogus logs and to fill up your disk with bogus logs. So you have to be very careful about that. So do you have a trusted management network? Accessibility. Does your logging solution use a custom client which only works on a certain OS, on a certain day of the week, on a certain day of the month, runs an ancient version of Shockwave? That's something to look for. A lot of vendors like to sell stuff like that. Does it support multiple users? Can you limit access to specific users to specific things? Can you tie it into your identity management system? You know, SAML, LDAP, Kerberos, all that. Important questions to ask. So here are some open source logging solutions out there. There's a lot more, but here's some of them that I've looked at and seem to do a good job. ElkStack is very popular. It is Elasticsearch, which is the database backend, Logstash, which is processing incoming logs, inputs, and formatting them, and Kibana, which is the web UI. And I think the big attraction is that it's open source and there's no limitation on the amount of traffic you can send to it. You can scale it up infinitely without having to pay anybody anything. Now, there's a lot of caveats to that, I realize, but in any case, you can build this out and scale it up to your heart's content without paying too much money. Graylog is similar to ElkStack in concept, whereas ElkStack has those three main components. Graylog has the web UI encompassing all the configuration, all the inputs, and all the web UI aspects, as well as authentication. But it also hooks into the Elasticsearch database backend. OSIM is a SIM. You can use it for log management, kind of, but it's not really good at it. It's mainly focused around small businesses. So it has a lot of best of breed open source security tools built into it. It uses MySQL as a storage backend. Security Onion wraps some of the best of breed sensors with Elk Stack, and it's containerized. And SymMonster is similar to that, and it also has different tools that it bundles together, but it all ties together with Elk Stack. And then syslog. Oh, sorry. So syslog, it's the old guard. Chances are you have it on your system and you don't really realize it. If you need to do log management tomorrow, well, you know what? Stand up a Linux server and send logs to it. You're done. Yeah, there's a little bit more to it, but still, it's simple, it's stupid, it works. So Elk Stack is general purpose. I think the big selling point is that they have a lot of log formats and parsers built into it. The charts and graphs and all of that are excellent. They've built in a lot of lookup tables and a lot of advanced functionality. It's featured heavily in SANS training, as you know, when you're going through and pulling up logs out of a infected system. So it's very, very, very useful, and a lot of people are using it for incident response. Graylog also similar. It packages all of the actual processing together. So your inputs, your index management, all of that is kind of built into one web UI instead of breaking it out into pieces. We mentioned OSIM. It's a turnkey install, very simple to actually get set up. It's meant to run as an appliance. So if you have a small business or small organization, it's kind of a nice little place to start. It has its own incident ticketing system, vulnerability scanning, asset management, all that stuff kind of built into one. It doesn't scale very well. The database backend is very, very limiting on this. So I recommend if you install it, you install it as a virtual machine and make lots of snapshots. Security Onion, as I mentioned before, is containerized, uses Elk Stack. We've been using this at work a lot, and it uses the Hive as the ticketing system. And it really is kind of, it is a nice, well put together product. So in the install is actually pretty simple too. So I've used this a while, and I really like it. And of course, I've talked about syslog. It's ubiquitous, it's cheap, it's stupid, it gets the job done. But prepare to do a lot of regexing. Then we get into kind of free-ish, that little kind of ugly side of the freemium part of the open source community. So SymMonster, it is an open source product, kind of, and that, but it does have some limitations. So it's limited to 100 endpoints at 5,000 events per second, which is quite a bit, but bear that in mind. Splunk is not open source, but there is a free version of it. But the free version is limited to 500 megabytes of logs per day, which if you're a small organization, that's not bad. The beauty of Splunk, it's like the gold standard of a SIM. It's what it should be. You've got an excellent indexing system. You have lots and lots of pre-built apps that you just install and they work. So if you have a small environment and you need just log management SIM capability with good graphing and charting, Splunk free is kind of a good way to go. So anyway, every distro listed here has some type of corporate entity that's backing it. So I think the idea is that you install the open source version, you scale it out, you figure out if you're going to use it. And then if at some point somebody gives you a budget, then you can get the corporate entity, insert corporate entity name here to buy the support for it. And then you have people willing to support the software. So that's kind of the freemium model in a nutshell. Here's some key things to think about when you're planning it all out. One of the things you need to do is get data into your SIM. At this point, it doesn't matter what SIM you're using. You need to find a way to get data from, in this case, Windows into a SIM. So there's 3 really good options. WinLogBeat and FileBeat are excellent. They have a lot of the parsing capabilities built in, and it does a lot of the heavy lifting for you when parsing logs and getting them sent out to the storage platform of choice. NXLog isn't quite as robust, but it has all the basics of what you need. It's only 32-bit, but it'll do the job. Then OSEC and Wazoo, it's pronounced Wazoo. I keep thinking Wazaa, but it's a host-based IDS, and it has a really nice method of authenticating to the server. And then part of that communication is transferring logs. So from a log management standpoint, being able to use the OSEC or Wazoo client to transfer your Windows logs or Linux or whatever, I think that's a good idea and it's a strong option because of the security aspects to it. The other ones you can configure TLS, but I think OSEC, Wazoo, I think are a little bit better at it. So say you have a 1,000-year-old server, an AIX, AIX, old FreeBSD server, something like that. You can, the syslog server sends logs. It works pretty good. You can tell it to read a arbitrary file somewhere in the file system and have it send logs just as syslog. The newer versions of rsyslog and syslog-ng have a lot of plugins. Everything from Elasticsearch support to JSON support to all kinds of support. So if you can't add an agent to a Linux server or a Unix server, something like that, it's a good option. So there's some older options when you're working with Windows. I wouldn't recommend them because there's a bunch of problems with this. One, it's old code, and well, people shun that like the plague. But also when you're converting directly to syslog, one of the problems, if you're using UDP, it'll truncate the log messages. Windows by default likes to send very, very large messages. And in addition to the message, it sends the full KB article on the message. So each and every message is going to be, 10 kilobytes. I mean, it's going to be a fairly large log event. So if you're truncating that, you're losing a lot of data. Plus, Windows event logs, they like to embed lots of data inside of that. So something to keep in mind is that if you just need to get something resembling logging into a syslog server, you can do this. I wouldn't recommend it. Windows, it can log your pants off. There are certain types of logging that once you turn on, you cannot turn off. You can easily crater any log management system just by turning on all of Windows logging. So keep that in mind when you're scaling out your log management system. Make sure that not only are you planning ahead and scaling your system out for everyday traffic, but also figure that your business is going to go through seasons. And so at one part of the season, it may be pretty dry and you're not making that many logs. And then all of a sudden, your business is going like gangbusters and you're really jamming the data onto the disks. So keep that in mind when you're planning ahead. I mentioned the UDP problem. TCP is probably the best option on that because it's more accurate in getting the information to the log management server. If at all possible, if you have any control over the logs that you need to store, make sure that they're being stored in some type of parsable format. JSON is a favorite. Ceph format is very common in the log management industry. CSV or key value are also very useful. CSV is troublesome because people like to put extra commas and their CSV, and it tends to break things. So keep that in mind. Also, with your logs, make sure you have a unique source, a host, in the event type parameters. So a common problem is that sometimes logs won't have a source when you're sending it to the log server, so it doesn't know where it came from. Or if you're reading it directly from a disk, it may not necessarily, all your logs may come apparently from this one server that isn't where they actually came from. So keep your sources, make sure you have sources in your logs, or your logs, so it gets parsed correctly. Splitting out different log sources into different inputs. That's handy because it depends on what platform you're using. Sometimes if you're just dumping everything in via syslog, the trouble is that if you're pulling fields out of your syslog messages and you have everybody talking to the same syslog port, you have the possibility of mis-extracting information from a different server type. So keep that in mind. If you break it out into different source ports, it's easier to keep that all separated. Storage. So this is my oldie goldie, you know, in the year of 1999, 711 floppy disks would equal 1 gigabyte. So in any case, it was nice and simple to measure out your data at that point in time, I guess. Not really. Your log events are going to they're going to be about between 300 bytes to 100 kilobytes. It really varies. You won't really know your events per second until you measure it. There's just no way you can tell. You can make some guesstimates. So how that would work is you go through, get your number of system events, and then divide that by time. And then you would also potentially look at that over time and see what your peaks are and what the average is. So what is the sound of a firewall dying is kind of where you'd figure out what your peaks are. Gigabytes per second, which is your events per second times the log message size in bytes. So you can average that, divide it by 1 gig. The importance of these two stats here, events per second and gigabytes per second, is that a lot of for-profit log management systems use these two statistics to gauge how expensive their license is. So Splunk is measured in gigabytes per day. So and once you get beyond like 50 gigs, it starts getting ridiculous. I think even at 5 gigs, it's ridiculous. So any case, so during your planning, when you're trying to figure out what direction you want to go, these are the two statistics you want to figure out first. What is your environment going to produce? And that will determine how much money you have to spend, either with a professional product or if you have to go the open source route. An example of items on your network and kind of a guesstimate of what they'll produce. So a Windows server that's highly utilized, like a file server or something like that, will generate around 7 events per second. A normal server will do about 1 event per second. A firewall will do about 340 events per second. This is going to vary a lot, but if you don't know what your environment's going to produce, you can come up with a very rough guesstimate based off of these kind of typical network components. Surges. In a previous environment, we averaged 20 or so gigs per day in Windows logs, and then during enrollment, it multiplied by a factor of 10, and we blew out our licenses. So keep in mind that's going to happen. You want to, if you're going to be dealing with a for-profit log management system, figure out what they're going to do if you go over your license. Some of them will shut down your web UI, others you have to call up and beg for an override. it varies. So if you're trying to decide which direction you're going to go, if you're going to go open source or buy something, that would be an important question to ask. Example here, if you have in your environment, you set up a syslog server and you figure out that you're getting 15 million events per day. That equates to about 173.6 events per second. If you multiply that by the average log size, which is 1024 bytes, that's about 14 gigs a day. 14 gigs a day times 365 days a year is 5.1 terabytes per year. So that's kind of how your calculations would work. File compression. This is a way of doing more with less. So if you can't afford hardware, if you can't afford storage, then you need to find some way of dealing with all of this, log traffic. So an example with syslog is that you're just dealing with flat text files, and those compress really, really well. So you can get about 10-to-1 compression on a flat, text file. If you're dealing with mixed media that's being compressed, then it's not so good. It's 4-to-1, which is kind of average. And then when you're dealing with very small messages and or a database, that's going to come out to 2-to-1. So like, for instance, Elasticsearch, you get about 2-to-1 compression. Syslog can get 10-to-1, but like I said, that's very, very, very hard to search. And most of the SQL products just don't compress. So you can potentially do file system compression. In traditional databases, they don't like that because they're working directly with the data file or something like that, and it just doesn't work. Also, there's considerations of what overhead does the operating system need in order to do file system compression. So those are things to keep in mind. But if you have, all you have to work with is a server with a 8 terabyte hard drive, and you need to find a way to compress 10 terabytes of data a year, then or 10 to 15, you're going to need to find some way of crunching it down a bit. The database is important. If you're just using a standard SQL database, MySQL, Microsoft SQL, whoever, that's going to behave very, very differently under load. Over time, it's going to become slower and slower and slower. And there's a reason why you pay money to be DBAs. So that is, something to be aware of when you're planning this out. Who's going to be managing the database? What kind of things can you do to keep that going fast and make it functional? Potentially, everything we've talked about right now, like the open source solutions, there's a professional entity in the background that you could potentially hire to fix problems, but it's something you want to learn how to deal with it, because you're going to be dealing with database issues with log management. Then we get into retention policies. There's some technical ways, there are technical features that you want to look at when you're evaluating log management. Graylog, their pro version, the paid for version, has some automated tools for dealing with that, but Elasticsearch by itself has some new features they've built in. So that's something to keep in mind, even with third parties, is figuring out how to deal with data retention. Splunk uses a bucket system. So you have hot buckets, warm buckets, and cold buckets. And then those can be located on different file systems, potentially. It's all still searchable, but the files are rolled into different folders as it ages out. Some questions to ask yourself when you're trying to figure out retention would be what regulatory requirements you have, what is the maximum retention that you need, Are you going to get sued often? So that's something to worry about. Is somebody going to do a e-discovery on your organization and then snag all of your backups? Potentially, and do your backups contain anything that has personally identifiable information in it? So that's another important thing to ask. Then there's archiving, and can you remove information like PII after the fact, or is that going to even work? I've used 90 days retention without too many problems. Functional is about 6 months. If you're going to do any type of yearly business reporting, 12 plus months may be needed. You got to figure it out on a case by case basis. You just don't know what you don't know. In situations where you need to retain logs for 6 years or longer, then you start having to worry about hot and cold storage, or just buying tons and tons and tons of drives. So we talked about that a little bit. There's been a lot of breaches in the past due to oversharing and mishandling of e-discovery information. So that's something to be aware of. One of the things you can do to prevent that is you can potentially break out logs into a different index and have some transforms that you can anonymize the IP addresses and any type of data. You can turn things into SHA hashes and stuff like that to potentially allow the logs to be useful in the future, but not damaging. Some tricks you can do is you can close indexes that aren't being used or searched very often. So if you have problems with CPU and memory capacity, you can keep things running quickly just by closing off old indexes. One thing about storage is when you're dealing with online storage, it's simple. You just get lots of drives. If you need cold storage, which means you have 6 years of data, but you don't particularly need to get direct access to it on any given moment, but you have to have it, then you want to use a method of cold storage. So you can use like Amazon Glacier or something like that, but you're talking about a monthly fee. Even though that's not very much money, it does add up over time. Or you can use something like tape storage. Tape storage, the upfront cost is huge, but the actual cost per terabyte is very, very low. It's about half what any other storage medium out there is right now. Cheaper than discs, cheaper than CDs, cheaper than anything. CDs are actually hilariously expensive. So tapes are the way to go if you need to do cold storage. Also, most tape systems support some type of encryption, which will help keep them from falling into the wrong hands. Care and feeding. So when you're setting up a log management system or a SIM, with a log management system, you eventually just have to, when you have a situation where you need to access it, you're doing everything right there and then. So you're extracting the logs and you're having to do big searches through those logs for specific things. With SIMs, you go through and as a function of indexing individual logs, you're extracting fields, and then that gives you the opportunity to run a lookup against that field. So if you have something like a Windows event ID, then you can have a lookup table that gives you a textual explanation of what that ID means. If you have an IP address, it can look up what country of origin it was. You can do a lot of stuff with search lookups. You can do it at search time, which you're querying potentially a live source that's telling you, as of right now, this IP address is here. Or you can do it at index time, which will tell you what it was at the time of indexing. Because we're potentially trying to paint a picture in a given point of time, doing lookups at index time is kind of a very important thing to do, because if you look at a 12-month-old log, Apache web server log, your IP addresses are going to be, they'll be different. So what was in Russia at the time is now in, Indiana. Who knows? Transformations, you can do some programmatic things when you're pulling logs in. So for instance, cryptographic hashes, reformatting the data, changing the date formats, that kind of stuff. When, like for instance, in Splunk and in Elasticsearch, you're dealing with indexes. So you have, by default, you start with one index and you throw all your logs into it. But if you start having too many fields, then you start to have problems with that index, and you'll run into errors that will drop event logs. So the best thing you can do is create multiple indexes for multiple log event types. Excuse me. So different data types can have different retention requirements. So that's another good reason. So if you don't particularly care about the development environment, web server logs, but you have to keep the staff information system logs till the end of time, then storing them on different indexes and creating different retention periods for those indexes is kind of the way to go. I mentioned earlier about inputs. And specifically Graylog, inputs are associated directly with extractors. So for instance, if you have a bunch of Apache web servers, you send them all to one port. And then if you have a bunch of generic syslog traffic, you send it to another port. And then you have different extractors on those inputs. And the value of that is that you have less junk going into your indexes, because you don't want your extractors to parse logs from the wrong server. There's a couple notes here. For instance, Graylog and a lot of the stuff is based off of Java, and Java has a lot of restrictions. By default, it can't run services on privileged ports. So chances are you'll be creating inputs above port 1024. You can change that, but every time you upgrade Java, you'll have to go and fix that again. So it's just better to figure that out ahead of time. During field extraction, specifically in Graylog, you're creating kind of a chain. So it'll check one regular expression, and then if that hits, then it'll extract, and then it'll move on to the next log. But then the next one comes through, and if it doesn't hit the first one, it'll check the second one. If it doesn't hit the second extractor, it'll hit the third one, and so on and so forth. And the trouble with this is that if you have any one extractor that is inefficient, that's going to gum up the works. So if you break it out into different inputs, you can potentially compartmentalize that. So if it is inefficient, it doesn't crater the system. When dealing with storage systems, I think the magic number to look at is 1500 IOPS or faster. Spare RAM is preferable. Disk swapping causes lots and lots of problems. You need those IOPS for storing data. You don't want to waste capacity disk swapping because you don't have enough RAM. Because of how Elasticsearch works, it makes use of the operating system disk caches for speed. So the more spare RAM you have, the better. There's a specific setting, VM swappiness in Linux, that will help reduce disk swapping. So that's something to know if you start working with any type of database that is sensitive to swapping. GPT partitions are kind of the way to go, because they're not limited in size, at least not like the old ones were. Using some type of logical volume management, ZFS or RAID or something like that, where you can potentially expand storage by adding additional disks instead of having to screw around with changing partition sizes. Elasticsearch indices will be set to read only at like 90% disk utilization. So that's something to look at with any type of Elasticsearch based solution. There's some tricks that you can do to get that out of read-only mode. Even after you've added more disk space, you still have to go through and tell it to make it read-write again. So that's something to be aware of. You can break indexes into multiple shards and spread those shards out over multiple Elasticsearch nodes. So that's useful if you need to, you effectively double your storage requirements if you do something like that. If you double up, so if you have a shard in one place and then you decide to have a alternate shard or a redundant shard, I'm not remembering the right word for it, but essentially you double up the nodes you need to do something, but then you can afford to shut down a node for maintenance without impacting the database because it's a duplicate node. So something to keep in mind if you need to patch things is to budget in extra storage capacity and server capacity so that you can have some duplication in your storage so that you can do maintenance on your storage nodes without impacting the log management system and the database availability. So you'll need some skills in order to get an open source solution to scale correctly. Load balancers, a commercial load balancer I recommend. Usually they do UDP traffic, TCP traffic, just about, mostly HTTP. Solutions that are like Graylog have some API stuff that's made so that it can talk to the load balancer and tell it when a node is failing, so that the load balancer can shift traffic to other nodes. So that's kind of a big selling point. You can do the same thing using the open source products for load balancing for Apache and Nginx. But both Apache and Nginx are kind of tricky when dealing with UDP traffic. So it's hard to do with those. IP tables can be used to be a poor man's load balancer. Syslog can be configured to load balance outgoing traffic to multiple hosts, but neither of them are particularly good about detecting when the host is down. So keep that in mind. All right. We talked a little bit about the things to look at for Elasticsearch maintenance. So understanding kind of how that all works. Most of your interaction with Elasticsearch is going to be using the curl command. So you're sending commands directly using to a RESTful interface, telling it to set to read write or something like that. Clustering, doing any type of service clustering is a good skill to have. Linux server administration, unless you just are blessed with a overabundance of Windows licenses. Storage systems, understanding how those work is important because you can't really just stuff this on a server with one hard drive. It really does help if you have a storage system, multiple drives, etc. And you also have the benefit that a storage system will detect errors on hard drives faster and it'll allow you to fix it. Whereas just having a standard Linux file system on a single drive, if that drive fails, it's done. And then when building out any large installation of any application, understanding how to get SSL certificates to work. So having a SSL certificate authority. If your company has a public key infrastructure, that's great. Otherwise, you'll be spending lots of money on expensive certificates or finding creative ways to get Let's Encrypt to work. understanding how regular expressions works, you'll be doing that a lot. So get comfy with it. Working with JSON, it's just like any other file format. It's going to be problematic. XML, I don't recommend. It's just too difficult to work with in this environment, in my personal opinion, but it's doable. You just make a monster regular expression that parses it, I guess. I know that some of the advanced like file beats and all that can do that. I just haven't gotten into it. And then understanding RESTful API programming, where you can potentially extract logs from web services, because that's, I think you're going to be doing a lot of that. So here's kind of a list of some of the products that I mentioned earlier. We got OSIM, ElkStack, Graylog, and all of the agents that I think I mentioned earlier. And without further ado, do you have any questions?
Well, a few came in on Discord,
okay,
along with a lot of memes and all the other things you expect on Discord. But first one was, I think, for someone setting this up at the house, like for their personal home environment, what's your recommendation on storage? On how long retention?
So I set up. You know what? Let me show you kind of what I have. Give me a second here. Up. So the Intel makes these wonderful mini form factor PCs, the NUC, next unit of computing. And you can get some Celeron models for like next to nothing. So the price to performance there is really good. All right, let me share this. So by default, remember I was mentioning using PKI. Graylog, it can support it, but it's really tough to do it. It's a lot easier if you have a load balancer, even if you just have the one node in front of it. So it handles all the SSL certificate stuff. So this is Graylog. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay. Yep. So in this case, let's look at the indices. So I have different indexes set up for different log types. So on this, this is a Celeron 4-core computer with 16 gigs of RAM and a 500 megabyte, or sorry, 500 gigabyte hard drive. And so it has some default indexes. So it has a default index set, which everything normally goes into. Has some system events. I created one for router firewall. Then Suricata was a Apache. So I broke those out into individual indexes. I'm using, so the sensor and the actual log management system are all in the same system. So I'm using rsyslog to actually forward the traffic to Graylog. Let's take a look at Wazoo. So Wazoo is an HIDS, so it's of course telling me that I am a bad person and I need to apply some security stuff. But this, how this works is that this is kind of a dashboard of sorts, and I'm aggregating individual fields. Down here's actual logs. I can search for things at the top here. In this case, I'm looking for Wazoo alert. But I'm pulling in the information using JSON format. So here's the actual JSON field. There's the original field. This one didn't get parsed. And remember, I was talking about how JSON can be difficult. In this case, it's encapsulating a lot of open ports, and it's exceeded the length of the log event, so it didn't parse right. So that's one thing I got to fix. A better way of dealing with this is using the actual file beats agent to actually read the file and transmit it correctly. So, but this is another example here. So agent name, IP address, data source IP, and of course it tells us the rules. So this is an example of a JSON parsed rule. If we go back up here, I can show you the IDS. So this is just a quad-core Celeron that this is all running on. And this also includes the Suricata IDS. So we have some things here that I've enriched. So I have a country code that this is not something that Suricata does normally. So incoming logs, if it detects a IP address field, it will automatically run a lookup to see what country of origin that IP address came from. This is OTX is the Open Thread Exchange, and then it'll check that IP address to see if there's any news articles on that. So in this case, there's 50 for this IP address, 35 for this one. And then of course it tells us the alert severity. Part of the getting geo information is that you can also map it. Depending on what system you're using, this one is very rudimentary. So if I were to say, if I were trying to create a map for a metropolitan area network, it'd be difficult to do with this. But Splunk is a lot better at that. They have better mapping tools. So anyway, that's kind of how the lookups work and some of the panels work. I'm also looking up who has information, reverse DNS information, all of those are lookups. And on the topic of doing extractors, in this case, I'm dumping everything into UDP, which is exactly what I said not to do. How extractors work is you put them in order. So which one fires first? And then I'm going through and extracting and enriching here. So this is the who is lookup table. So we covered kind of indexes. We covered the kind of hardware. As far as retention, I'm using a 30-day retention period just because I've just built this and I haven't kind of gotten a gauge of how much data I'm working with. In this case, I can look here and day to day, over the past 30 days, I think I've had a peak of about 2 gigabytes a day. And then from this, I can come up with kind of an average. So I guess around 1 gig a day. That 500 gig hard drive, it should last me a good long time. So I'd say better part of a year I could probably get away with.
Cool. Well, there were a couple other questions, but we're over time for the symposium, so we'll catch those in the Discord.
All right.
Great work, man. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was an awesome presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for the info.
Good job.
What happened at noon, dude?
What happened at noon?
Yeah,
China.
That was a pretty fat bar, buddy.
Same thing that happens every day at noon, China.
Ah, those bastards. All right. Well, we won't really take any time to cut over. Ben, do me a solid, or Joel, whichever. Give Banshit's co-host. So, as we do that, we're going to start this symposium up. So I don't know if y'all know what a symposium is, but the old school definition of that is everyone's supposed to consume a lot of drugs and share their opinion about stuff. We're not going to do the first part, but we're going to do the second part. All right. So this is going to be as close to a real symposium as you can get in the 21st century. So what is that going to entail? Well, as I mentioned during the news cycle, there's this little thing that some researchers from the University of Minnesota did in recent history that I think is quite admirable.
I would disagree greatly with that.
That's exactly why you're here. So we're gonna start this discussion, and we're gonna call it a discussion. And remember what I said in the very beginning. Remember, attack ideas, not people. So you're gonna see Banshitz and I bantering at one another, and we're both going to disagree with one another vehemently. But note that there is no animosity betwixt us. And the same should be said for any input that you, the participants, might provide. Like we mentioned earlier, we do want other people to join in on this conversation. Now, how we go about doing that is going to be a little interesting. What I am going to request you to do, if you would like to hop into this conversation, is shoot me a DM on the Discord and say that you want to hop in. All right. And I'm going to do my best to be monitoring it on another computer and actually keep tabs on this shit and, be able to tag you in a good time frame. But I don't know how this is going to go. I ain't making no promises. It should be fun, should be interesting, but I ain't making no promises. So I know y'all have heard my happy ass talk a whole bunch. Ben, why don't you introduce yourself? I'm just going to keep calling you by your screen name, by the way, because we know I don't do real
Brienne.
names. But
my name's Brienne. I'm a part-time graduate student working full-time as well. And one giant disclaimer here before we start, neither of us are speaking for our employers, current or previous. Neither of us are speaking for current or previous academic institutions, any of that. This is entirely our thoughts.
Yep. Mizzou does not endorse anything I'm saying, ever. Usually not even during 9 to 5, but that's another story for another time. But yes, these are personal opinions. If either of our employers are watching, we love you. Please keep giving us money. So with that out of the way, let's cover what happened at a very high level.
And I'm not sure if you got kind of the full thing, because there's a lot more than just what happened couple weeks back.
Shoot, let's have you take away for the preview
so
then.
To start with, we'll go back to, let me see if I can screen share. So this paper was actually published a while back. The reason that the Linux kernel ripped out all the commits is they found additional commits that looked to be malicious, and were like, you guys experimented on us before, F you, we're done, we're ripping everything out that you guys have committed. The UMN folks said that, oh, it was a tool. Not quite sure what I think on that one. That is to be determined. But some interesting things about this. First of all, they did this research without the IRB at all. IRB is the Institutional Review Board. For research, that is basically like the equivalent of running it by the lawyers. Sometimes you also have to run it by the lawyers, but in the case of research, especially research involving human or animal subjects, the IRB board, they are your go, no go. And so they did this entire project without even talking to them, being like, hey, yeah, so should we get approval from you guys or not? They didn't even think to have that happen. And then the IRB, they only went to the IRB after the paper was approved to a top tier conference, IEEE S&P, and the professor of the grad students tweeted out the abstract, and there were a lot of people who were like, hey, yeah, doesn't look yet like you have an IRB for that. You might want to get one. And so after they had already done the research, they were like, hi, we did this research already. We might kind of need your approval, we question, but here's what's going on. And they didn't really explain what was going on well. So they thought, so the IRB, I can see how they could have explained it to where it sounded like there were no humans involved. It was process, like automated code magic, mumbo jumbo sort of thing. You can very easily, if you want to be malicious or an idiot, pardon my opinion, they will, you theoretically can circumvent that, but there's a lot of problems around that. Like I said, the IRB is the equivalent of, at your company, the lawyers. So you want to be honest with the lawyers. You don't want to try and circumvent the lawyers. The lawyers are there to cover your own rear. And oh, one additional thing, from the abstract they tweeted to the abstract of the paper they published, they changed a few things about it. One of which is they included in the original abstract that they actually were able to introduce bugs into the system, but when they emailed the, or when they were in the conversations with the Linux kernel, they were like, yeah, we didn't introduce any vulnerabilities, which directly contradicts their paper. Did I miss anything major?
Not that I'm aware of. Nope. That all sounds like an apt summary.
Okay.
So that all happened. And of course, people are very upset by this, right? Folks are upset that permission wasn't granted. You know, this isn't how pen testing, how security research is supposed to be done. I agree with all of that. Now, this is where I maybe rustle up some jimmies. I believe that they were justified in doing what they did. Now, let me caveat that with some of the things that, some of the changing of statements in particular, that rubs me the wrong way. So they definitely should have gotten their story straight. Did you successfully get malicious code committed to the kernel or not? You know, that's not something that should be beaten around the bush. But regardless of all that, what, in my opinion, what they have done is illustrate how easy it is to get malicious code into something as important, as critical to free and open source software as the Linux kernel. I would call that the holy grail of this kind of research, honestly.
I would agree there's been a lot of good conversation in the threads that have happened, but for me, the thing I still can't get over is the fact they didn't think they were doing human research. The fact that you were putting code in front of a reviewer and they have to look at it and be like, yes, that's good. No, that's not. That is directly in violation of anything I've ever heard of in terms of an IRB. And so that's really what ruffles my feathers about this whole thing, is the fact that they didn't go through the proper channels. First of all, doing research on human subjects without the approval. Second of all, not even like, that's paperwork that you fill out. It's annoying, but relatively okay when someone knows they're being experimented on. When you're doing an experiment where the participants don't know they are part of the experiment, that paperwork gets exponentially more, like, it's more scrutinized. You have to go through a lot more, and you have to repeatedly be like, yeah, you can stop doing this at any time. And so that's the part that really just, I feel like they did not go about that the right way. Also, their response to all the controversy, that one's a fun one. Let me just pull that up here and share it. Here, let's see here. Let me share. So can everyone see this part here I'm highlighting? Let me try and make it bigger. Can you zoom in? Yeah. Okay. So there's suggestions. This one right here, honey, no. That just being like, oh, if you include it in your code of conduct, we won't do this sort of experiment again. Well,
Now, I guess, so that is funny, but by the same time, is this not similar to, you know, how ironic and funny it is that the main kernel maintainers are getting this upset? How dare you make me do my job? How dare you make me review code?
they didn't have to rip out just 1 or 2 commits though. It was over 200 commits that they had to re-review after they had, like, they could no longer trust the committers. So it's not just, oh, I have to look back over 1 or 2 commits. It was pulling out quite a bit, and some of which weren't just clean reverts either. And so, in my opinion, it feels super, I'm sorry, but I'm not, if that makes sense.
I think I get that. I think I view a lot of that as the IRB and such as, and this is, aren't you all happy I'm not in the research world? That all sounds like bureaucratic red tape and bullshit to me. And I understand why it has to exist. You know, this is why I'm not a researcher, right? But by the same token, you know, that doesn't, I think my biggest rub is simply that the constraints that are put on researchers don't reflect real world conditions. And as a result,
I would argue that academia and industry, they have this interesting relationship. The thing that, there's a reason I'm working full-time and doing a part-time master's and not a full-time master's. I don't like academia. I don't like the paper for paper's sake, which is what this feels like. I want something that if I build something cool and it ends up in a paper, okay, cool, yeah. But I don't want to be building something just to be able to get a paper out of it. I want to build something I feel is actually viable and usable.
okay, we've actually got people that want to hop in. J-Dubs, hop in. Preach your mind, pimpin'.
Can you hear me?
Gotcha.
So, Ben, you're focused on something that matters in the world of academia. In the real world, I don't have an IRB. Is your objection entirely that in your inside baseball game here, they didn't play by the rules of academia, and if I, as a private researcher, had done the same thing, you wouldn't have the same objections?
I think I would still be miffed in terms of the amount of work that was required to be done to revert these changes, and just,
well, hang on.
I'll be honest, the attitude of these researchers is not one that seems collaborative.
Totally. By the way, the way they responded seemed immature, and I'm on board with the spirit of whatever. The reversion of 200 plus commits, that was an overreaction as far as I can tell on behalf of the kernel maintainers. It seems like they got so pissed at it, they said, fine, you know what? You want to mess with me? I'll rip out everything that you guys were doing to take
But
take
by
my
the
balls
same
off."
token, you have an IP that is known to be malicious. You block it at the firewall and be like, F it, I'm done.
Yeah, they didn't stop with the 2 researchers that were doing the commits. They took out the entire university, including fixes of vulnerabilities that went back 3 years.
Most of those were from that research group that was doing this research.
But I'll make the distinction that you just made. It's not that they blocked like the IP, it's like they blocked a country. It may be all the traffic that was coming from that country, or the majority of it was coming from 1 or 2 IPs that were known bad, IP addresses. But I think the analogy holds. You're also really focused, I think, on the amount of work and the human side of it. But I think there's some legitimacy to think that they did not think they were engaged in human research. They were researching a system. That system happens to be run by humans. And in the world of academia, I get that you split hairs about this. In the real world, I don't care. This is the system of how we maintain software. And it's essential software. I think I think the value that they did by exposing this, it's something that we've all suspected for a long time, but they blatantly showed how easy it was to get malicious code in there. And if I'm a real world attacker, if I'm a nation state, and I'm looking for ways to get that, think about the SolarWinds supply chain attack. That wasn't targeted at one particular customer. They infected tens of thousands of customers. What could infect more customers more than the Linux kernel? Opening our eyes to how devastatingly vulnerable we are to having bad code get into critical systems does the world an immense service, I think.
I think that overall, there is definitely conversations that needed to happen. For me, their methodology is what was flawed. You could have just as easily proved this by asking a couple of maintainers for a bit of their time and been like, okay, we're going to put 50 potential patches in front of you, identify which are malicious, which aren't, and which you would likely let through, and not put the kernel itself at risk.
Now, wouldn't that wind up jeopardizing the research, though? So, for example, if someone tells me, "Hey, by the way, you're getting reviewed today," well, hell yeah, I'm gonna be on point. You ain't gonna catch me surfing Reddit that day. You ain't gonna catch me, doing some other stuff that maybe I do in my day to day. By the way, Mizzou, I totally don't look at Reddit every day. I get that permission is normal and is the de facto, but what influence would that notice have done to
And that is
situation?
also where there's a few other options that you could have evaluated. I believe Evan would like to tag in.
Yeah, we've definitely got a bunch of people looking to tag in. Yeah, whoever you called in, go for it.
1 second here. Is it gonna start? There we go. Cool. Awesome. Howdy.
Yo.
So yeah, this is something I've followed quite a bit. I'm actually a Linux mirror maintainer. So it's definitely something that's been near and dear to me. And I think a lot of good points have been brought up, right? There are definitely issues where if you let the researchers know, suddenly that taints the research, right? I'm actually currently doing a PhD, so I am sadly very familiar with the IRB process. As someone who doesn't like academia, but whose work respects PhDs, that's just kind of what I'm doing. And I think there are definitely options in place, right? There's definitely, like, in the real world, yes, they don't care. We don't care about the process. We don't care about the ethics. If I'm a malicious actor, I'm going to try and taint the kernel. That's my goal, right? And I guess that's where I definitely feel where Brianne is coming from, because academia has a process. And if you don't play by their rules, they're not going to respect it. And so I think where a good middle ground would have been, and one of the things to point out too, Greg, what's his name? Crow Hartman, GKH. He's one of the most easygoing people on that team. I mean, he's like Linus Torvalds' polar opposite, right? And so the fact he had such a reaction definitely kind of, I think, raises where maybe something could have been done different. I forget the name, but one of the senior devs had even said if the communication was better, this wouldn't have been a huge issue. because I 100% agree with what JW is saying, that this, and what all of us are saying, right? It is a huge issue, right? Yeah, it's not an academic project. I get that. And what I'm saying is not that we should treat it as one, but that if you want to get the academic community and really, I guess, kind of industry, because everyone likes to pay attention to academia, you need to somewhat play by their rules. And I don't mean like necessarily giving them forewarning or anything like that. There are all sorts of human trial ethics and exceptions that can be done so that you can proceed without them knowing right away. Because, right, there are studies where if you inform the subjects ahead of time, you taint your results. And this is definitely a case where they probably could have done it without the initial permission, kept a list of the commits, all the commits, and then communicated to them at the end. Because anytime there's human research, right, and you don't tell them, there is a debriefing period. And that is where I think, and I don't want to put words in Brianne's mouth, but I think that's where the issue comes, is that the communication was lacking. 100%, it's not an academic project, and this is the holy grail of open source. It has to be protected, and we need to have proper software and secure software engineering methodology and code review if this is going to keep going as the phenomenal project it's been. Like, I'm hardcore about not doing stupid things like having stir copies in software. That just shouldn't happen. And yeah, it's a case where they maybe had every right intention, and they absolutely showed a thing that needed to be brought to light. It's just there were mistakes made in following the academic process that I think is going to taint the message.
I think I can agree with that pretty wholeheartedly. And I will especially call out that I agree with the fact that at the end of their research, they should have gone to the maintainers and be like, hey, by the way, we just pulled the wool over your eyes on all this. You're going to want to go ahead and backtrack that. And that, yeah, I 110% agree that was a major shortcoming of UMN. That is something that they should have done. Yes.
As a native Minnesotan, I was a little disappointed. I'm just saying. If you ever heard of Egypt, James Lee, he used to do development for like Metasploit. Now he works for Black Hills InfoSec. Has the Beard of Knowledge on Twitter. Highly suggest looking him up. Very good red teamer. He once gave a talk at a security conference that really stuck with me on developing for open source. And if you're gonna call someone's baby ugly, do it very nicely. And I think that's where the research, it is just the courtesy of communication, right? Give them the list of commits, be like, hey, we did this. We wanted to show a flaw. We really love your project, but this is a thing that had to happen. And there are going to be people that get offended and upset no matter what on this.
So we're mostly mad about the way they spoke. They weren't nice enough. Is the gist of why we're upset and the ethical outrage here?
Yeah, I would say that's accurate for myself. I think that, as supporters of open source, which I'm certain the researchers are, we're all on the same team, right? Like attackers, defenders, we're all on the same team and we're working to make something better. But, and like I said, it is a problem that should have been pointed out. Definitely.
I don't know if all attackers are on this. I get what you mean, but the ethical pen testers are on the same team. Yeah. All right, Ben, I'm going to tag you in. You hit me up and wait, hold up. Maybe is it you? Yes.
Yeah. With me.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm on the against side here, but my reasoning is completely different than everybody else's, because I don't feel like, the communication was bad and everybody agrees with that. And that's fine, but I don't think it's a valid test. What they were trying to test, I don't think they were successful in actually testing, because what they did is they took their legitimate university credentials and the university's legitimate history of technical contributions and so forth, and exploited all of that as a trusted, I shouldn't say completely trusted, but a somewhat trusted source for this type of information that wouldn't gotten the scrutiny that maybe it should have based on that source. So let's say we're at the next physical SecKC meeting and Aaron comes to me and hands me a USB stick and he's like, check out this dope mix I made. Now it's not that I've known Aaron since I was 6, but that's a fairly trusted source. I'd probably take it home and let's check out the jam. Well, maybe not Aaron. Okay,
Yeah, I
let's
was
say
about to
Archwith
say, you
comes
could be
to
like,
me.
oh, he's a shitty DJ. What's going on here?
No, but someone whom I know well or even reasonably well hands me a USB stick, I'd probably like, okay, yeah, that's a legitimate source. I wouldn't take one off of somebody off the street. If they wanted to legitimately test this process, I think that they would have had to start from impersonating someone totally different, either just a random contributor or another university or somebody else. But they couldn't just walk in with the credentials they already had, having already had their university commit code, and then commit something nefarious and say, well, the whole system has failed because this one thing got in. That's not valid. That's like saying I was able to phish you because I emailed you something like and got you to pull a canary token or something so I could get your address. That's not really a fair comparison. If they wanted to come in and say, impersonate a completely outside random person, or if they wanted to come in and impersonate Berkeley or MIT or somebody else who might be liable to commit code, that would be a valid test. And there would be all sorts of context clues and other things that the kernel maintainers may or may not pick up on that may trip them into either giving it more scrutiny or a more thorough test or whatever. Then I think you have a legitimate experiment. But to walk in when you're already halfway there and say, well, the whole system's broken because I was able to do this. I mean, that's like putting a player on second base at the beginning of the inning and say, well, your team sucks because we got an RBI.
Your point depends on understanding who the threat actor is that you're modeling. And if you were talking about any little script kiddie or any new aspiring cyber criminal, that's great. I don't think that's who and I don't think many people here are worried about. I'm worried about nation state. And if you don't think they play the long game, there's some interesting stories to share with you about implants in the university system of nation states sending foreign intelligence agents here to attend universities for years.
That is a fair point, but I don't think, at least from the documentation that I read, that that's really what they were trying to model.
I think you raise a very interesting point that I hadn't considered before, namely, what was the level of trust offered to UMN prior to this incident? And I do think that that is a very fair thing to consider as well, for the exact same reasons mentioned earlier, right? If UMN previous to this had a history of delivering good code commits, then yeah, that would actually very much sort of give some credibility to why the kernel maintainers would, have just kind of maybe, I don't want to say like didn't review the code as, strictly. I don't know what the right phrase to use here is, but that's an excellent point that I hadn't considered before. I don't know where UMN stood prior to this.
And that is also something I do not know.
Yeah. May I offer something on that?
Oh, please.
I would actually say that might be a better emulation of a nation state threat in that case, because nation states are going to play the long game. MSS, Ministry of State Security from our friends across the sea, could very well have some developers that work hard on adding legit patches, even performance improvements to something like Linux, and then offer up some malicious commits. I mean, if they do that, they have the expertise to really embed it and make it look legit too. So in that sense, I think that prior trust is, I don't want to say a non-factor, but it's definitely something where it could help them. But I think that's also a valid thing to search for and say, trust no one, trust but verify.
That's how I would like to think that kernel maintenance is done, but
yeah.
Donnie, let's tag you in, Pimpin'. Donnie, where you at? Preach.
Hey guys. No, I think you all have said a lot of what I was thinking. So I don't really want to rehash too much, but you think a lot about the red teaming aspect of things. I think that this falls in that same category, right? If we've talked about the communication and messaging, and if you're doing a true red team, there's no or very little, let me say very little awareness of what's happening on a true red team engagement. Not a pen testing, but a true red team. You don't tell your CERT team, right, of what you're going to do. Your whole purpose is to try to understand how you're going to respond to an incident. And I don't know if they set out necessarily to do that. So I'm not suggesting that was the case here, but it certainly uncovered, right, that there is a gap in the process of how we're vetting code commits here, especially in the Linux kernel. And JW said it really well in terms of that nation state side of things. So if you have that inside threat, a true inside threat here, that's something that you got to also test for in some way. You have to understand, is that a possibility or not? And I think that's, to me, the most disappointing part of all of this is we're getting a little hung up here on one specific group and what they did, instead of the big picture of what this really means to us as a society and how we're using Linux. That's the bigger implication here that we should be talking about, in my opinion.
Yep, I agree with that as well. And that was the very first thing I thought of too, as well. You know, I've worked with researchers before, and I'm sure that these researchers are very smart, but pardon my phrasing, but if these chuckleheads can commit malicious code to the Linux kernel, what can a properly motivated, nation state actor perform? That was a big question in my head. Before I forget, we had at least one of the person. Let's see. Oh, okay. Evan, you already got in. I think I might actually be caught up. Oh no, AK, my bad. AK, jump on. I forgot. You didn't get me on Discord because VoIP lines are angry with Discord, but AK, hop in, pimp.
I'm probably not as well up to speed on what exactly happened. I'm like reading through their paper or whatever, but if they're gonna cowboy some research like this, probably pick a less consequential target than Linus Torvalds' little baby. And when your entire university gets banned for you being a dipshit, that's kind of what you deserve. I don't know. I don't even know what the controversy is. The implication of it is, if you do something stupid, you're going to be banned from making any commits forward. Why didn't they use their own accounts? Why did they use something that would affect the entire university?
Yeah, I mean, that's a totally fair take on it too, especially when it comes to tarnishing university reputation.
Yeah.
There's definitely something to be said about that.
I did see something funny. I actually went back and pulled it up, but it was a screenshot I had taken that I, for some reason, didn't save the website. Basically, the long and short of the response that the University of Minnesota's computer science department put out was basically the much kinder version of what the F did you do, why the F did you think it was okay, and who the F told you you could do this.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Man, I guess, I mean, if I would like to agree with, if you do stupid shit, you get what you deserve, but I mean, look at all the news stories, that I be posting every month, right? How many of those cats are getting caught? How many of those cats are getting, oh man, got Alex raising his hand up in here. Hold up. Before I bring you in, Alex, I mistook someone's mention of a comment earlier, and they actually did want to hop in. Maticus, get your ass up in here. What you got to say, pimpin'?
So I just wanted to throw in, and I think the sentiment has pretty much already been said. Academia itself has been shown to be the vulnerable piece here, right? And when we're talking about nation states playing the long game, like if you think academia is safe, if you think that pipeline is safe, here's the proof that it's not. That there's kind of an adjacent issue, like big security vendors, they aggregate all this data about how quickly their customers patch things. And then, they use that data to make sales, and that's their priority, right? There's similar priorities in academia. And this is all part of the system of trust that we've built, right? So those security vendors, they're making just general information security harder for us by sharing that data, aggregating it, and using it to make sales. And it's kind of similar here. We have all this trust built up in academia, but is that really valid, right? When you really test it, when you really push it to its limits, like should we trust the University of Minnesota or any other university? Why? 3 years of research? I mean, 3 years is not a long time in the grand scheme of things. So that's, I mean, that's basically my take on the issue. Thanks for letting me speak.
Yeah, without a doubt. To be fair, I don't know that I've met anyone, as speaking as someone who works in academia, I don't know if I've met anyone who would call academia secure. Uh, so I don't, yeah, not to, again, Mizzou, I love you. Please keep paying me. But that's, yeah, academia is not exactly well known for its tight security. I am curious. I don't know that I follow necessarily. Can you elaborate on the trust, the trust relationship, or how the trust relationship bears in play here? I missed that.
So I think I'm speaking in a general sense that might differ from the professionally accepted definition of the word trust that we have in the information security space. So forgive me for any confusion on that front, but really what I'm talking about is like if we just assume that process is going to be followed, then we've made a grave error. And I think that the university losing their ability to commit to the Linux kernel at this point is just a tiny drop in the bucket compared to how much we've gained now, knowing that, you know, now with the proof of concept that this pipeline is able to be used in this way, right? So like they may have done irreparable damage to the university, but again, bringing it back to the real world side, like that's almost completely inconsequential to what we've learned, that this pipeline of, you know, just allowing universities to commit because they're universities is now suspect. I mean, we will gain more from that than they will lose for no longer being allowed to commit from that particular, you know, university. So when I'm talking about trust there, I'm not necessarily speaking to the system of trust that we've built up through, you know, providers like Google and DNS and whatever, but just general trust that we put in institutions to do things well or securely or safely.
Okay, yep. That makes 100% perfect sense. I get that. Alex, I'm gonna tag you in, one of the eponymous, oh, I'm pronouncing that word wrong. He's one of the creators of SecKC, if y'all ain't know. Alex, what you got to say, Pimpin'?
What's going on? It's good to see everybody. Can you hear me okay? I think audio might be a little, is it messed up?
You're a little choppy, yeah.
Okay, well, sorry about that. I'll be brief. I think just from a red teaming perspective, like also it's really not that hard to get access to a developer. Like we were talking about like building trust and doing commits and all that stuff, which is completely valid points, but just compromising a trusted developer. Granted, it's a hard target, but probably isn't really that hard since there's quite a few of them. So that's one other aspect. I totally agree. It's a bad idea what they did, and they did some bad stuff, or they did some dumb stuff along the way. But it seems like a pretty valid, you know, concern, or at least, you know, something that we can learn from.
And that does seem to be the general consensus throughout everyone's comments tonight, is that the process that was gone about is definitely questionable. But that it sounds like I think everyone is in agreement that the findings at least were valid, right? Or that what came about from this research was eye-opening to some extent, right?
Yes,
Whether or not it was done properly. Well, it wasn't done properly, actually. I take that back. I think we all agree that it wasn't done properly. I think that should also call into question what is proper, what should proper be. I see Joel raising his hand. Pimpin', what you got to say?
So this goes back to the Cold War and Kim Philby, and colleges were used as a trust mechanism, and so also class membership, and that's what ended up taking down their intelligence capability, was because they over trusted those institutions, and it was relatively easy to plant somebody in there. In this case, you had a known good actor that had produced and was trusted, and then really it was that actor. How easy is it to steal that actor's credentials to do bad stuff, and would anybody even notice? So I guess that goes along with what everybody else has kind of has said on this, which is the good part of this should be that we now realize that the trust system that the colleges wield has some problems and needs some attention.
And Evan, you got some more preaching?
Well, this just reminds me of so one of the people that really got me into InfoSec, into software dev, he made this comparison back when the whole Snowden thing happened, which is a whole other conversation. Whether you agree what he did was right or wrong, whether you agree what the researchers at UNM or U of M did was right or wrong, it started an important conversation. Hot take that that's, yeah, like even I was hardcore against what U of M did at first. Between a previous conversation that I've had with others and this conversation, I'm definitely more of the middle ground, that I disagree with how they did it, but it was an important thing to have done.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I've been the entire time, is what they did all in all was a kick in the rear that was somewhat needed in terms of the, oh, it's open source, everyone can audit anything, it's automatically trusted. That's a giant project to audit and to trust. And unless you personally know every way every driver looks, everything like that, you can't. And so you've inherently trusted that, okay, someone else will have their eyes on it. But that's not always the case. But within that, there still is, like, it was a kick in the rear, but at the same time, their process was less than ideal. And I think that's about where, from what I can tell, almost everyone is in this call.
Yeah, I think that's
Well,
probably oh, go ahead, J-Dubs.
I'm far less sympathetic. I'm sorry. I get a lot of indignant, like, oh my God, how dare you? How dare you? Did you even, to my face, you did this. I'm not worried about the hurt feelings. Like, I get a pen test and I get my ass handed to me by the pen testers every time. You know what I don't just say? Oh God, you make me look so foolish. Why didn't I, if I'd only have known that you were going to attack me by, password spraying me, I would have made my passwords harder. Give me a break. This is a problem for the world. They should be given medals for showing us how bad this situation is.
If I may, I want to say, Banshoots, to your credit, like this conversation would not be interesting without your voice, right? Like even though I think, in general, a lot of people in this call are probably more on the side of like, yeah, we're glad they did it so that the thing has been done. That's certainly where I'm at. Like without you coming from the perspective of, it's still an important pipeline to protect and refine. I don't think this conversation would have had very interesting traction. So I think, as always, it's important to represent both sides of the argument, because without that, you really can't condense the interesting content.
Yep. Without that, without a dissenting opinion, without two different opinions, I should say. I wouldn't say neither of us would be a dissenting opinion exactly. But yeah, there's no conversation to have if there's not, multiple sides to it.
I'll just throw in 2 cents real fast and say that as someone who does pen testing, the very first thing you do before you pen test something is make sure that you have permission to pen test it. Now, that isn't to say that you inform the blue team that you're coming, but somebody's boss's boss has to give you permission.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's kind of where I was going to with the limited awareness, right? So you don't tell everybody, but somebody probably should have known. So I would agree with that in terms of the communication just wasn't there, maybe where it should have been.
I'll concede that too. I'm not an active developer, and I don't know how easy it is to ring up old Torvey and say, hey, buddy, we're gonna do a thing. You know, if that is feasible, then tight. You know, then yeah, that totally should have been done. If there was a way to notify someone other than the kernel maintainers themselves, right? I think that there's, is it possible that then that person would have told the maintainers? Yes, it is. I get that, but I think that would have been a better way to go about it for sure. But yeah, awesome conversations tonight, y'all. That is exactly what I was hoping to have happen with this, and y'all never fail me. Y'all make my heart swell. Yeah, I think we can go ahead and wrap it there. But I mean, no reason why we can't keep having these fun conversations on the Discord. So definitely, if you're not on the Discord, get on there. And yeah, anyone else got anything else they want to say before we close out? All right. Well,
actually, sorry, real quick question, because this is something I really haven't heard talked about, and it's to JW's point about the reaction from the Linux project. Essentially, what else have they done? Did they actually have a formal response that included what they plan to do to make sure this doesn't happen again?
I haven't looked recently. From what I could tell, they were planning on in an upcoming conference building conversations around how to build that web of trust, how to better kind of audit code, that sort of stuff. And in general, just how to prevent that sort of thing in the real case from happening.
So what I'm hearing you say is that they're going to sit down and try and develop an SDLC, which is something they should have had from the beginning, especially considering what we're talking about. And I think that's what JW's point was, is that the response from Mizzou being worded the way it was one thing, but I don't think that the kernel, I've lost my train of thought. Kernel reviewers are also blameless here, because their response was not in a professional manner either, because it should have been something along the lines of, hey, thank you for exposing this. Now, what do we actually need to do to fix it? And sit down and do it. Or at least that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, and I definitely feel overall that it was an eye-opener, and that part is very valid. But I think that the and conversations that needed to be had are being had. It's just again, I come back to, and that's where my biases exist, is the process they went through.
Hell yeah. All right, pimps and pimpettes. We'll go ahead and close it out there. A wonderful second Tuesday of the month, as usual. Hope to see y'all here once again. Same SecKC time, same SecKC place, except maybe we have it in person again sometime soon. And on that note, I guess as mentioned in SecKC 101, you got ideas for where we should have this joint? You should let me know, because I got that pretty high charisma score, but I'm kind of new to this town again after being gone for 13 years. So I don't know what's cool anymore and what's not. As it turns out, Toys R Us isn't around anymore, and that was one of my ideas for where to host the meetings. That ain't gonna work. So, yeah, I'm gonna need some folks who are a little bit more current on the up and up on what's good in KC and what's not.
We got you, Aaron.
Say what now?
Yeah. We got you. We'll help you get back to Kansas City living.
Perfect. Yeah, Circuit City. Yeah. And then we'll have our after party at Comp USA. All right.
Yeah, perfect.
I'm gonna go ahead and hop out of here. I don't know how long we want to let this Zoom run, but y'all stay safe, stay healthy, get on the Discord. Good conversations tonight. Good talks, everyone. Love you all. Peace.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Guys, thanks.
Good seeing you all.